the Agriculture Minister John Steenhuisen says South African trade with the United States poses no threat to American production. Steenhuisen says the recent U.S. tariffs imposed on South Africa, Brazil and Indian goods are not only based on balancing trade but indicates issues that go beyond tariffs. He says the world is experiencing a new era in which tariffs are being used to deal with issues outside of what would be generally trade concerns.
I do want to make this one point, which I think is very important, and that is that trade with the US also benefits the United States of America. Many of our products are counter-seasonal, so they pose no threat whatsoever to US production. And when it comes to citrus, both the pricing and the quality of the South African offering, given the exchange rate difference and given the incredibly high levels of and quality of production in South Africa, ensures that what lands in the United States is incredibly high products that benefit US consumers and benefit US agro processors. And I think that the US gets a good deal from South African agriculture, and it really, I think, will be a shame if we see a drop-off in these excellent quality products not being able to land in those areas. I also think that it is very clear now that these tariffs are not just around balancing trade. We've seen in a number of the letters that have been sent to various other countries, most notably Brazil and India recently, that these things go beyond just tariffs. And I think we're seeing some form of new era now where trade and tariffs are being used to deal with other issues outside of what would generally be trade concerns. And this is obviously a new normal to which we're going to all have to adapt. And as Minister Tau said, this is not something unique to South Africa. We have over 130 other partners around the world who are facing similar issues. We're also seeing that those countries are starting to come together to replace markets that have been lost. I shared last week with Minister Tau a deal that's been signed, for instance, between Brazil, who've been slapped with a 50% tariff, and Japan for the provision of beef. And I think we're going to see a lot of that diversification taking place. We are committed, as Minister Tau said, to diversification, and we're looking at extensive new markets where we believe that with the diversification we're never overexposed on any one particular market, which ensure that we're able to sustain ourselves and our trade going forward.
For more on this, we're joined by agricultural economist from the National Agricultural Marketing Council, Thabile Nkunjana. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. So, given the situation that is now being described as the new normal by the Minister of Agriculture, saying that, you do see that these tariffs are also being used for something a bit more than just a balancing of trade, how hopeful are you that this revised offer may find the favor of the United States?
So the reality is that South Africa really needs to, pursue US in regards to this, so that South African producers continue to get access to that market. As much as it is a very fluid situation, as Minister Tau has mentioned, and of course Minister John, it's a reality that as much as there are these complications, as recently announced by as of last week, that as much as there's a deals related to trade, but it looks like there are issues beyond that. But nonetheless, irrespective of what the previous deal was, and then adding to the one that is being put together now, the reality is that we really need to keep the hope high, because the reality is that given that the products that are going to the US are really products that are specific in terms of what that market requires, because the issue of diversification is not really going to address the recent situation that is happening in the US, and therefore even in the future we cannot overlook the US because of some challenges or any disputes, whether they are trade related or outside trade. So it is important that we continue push forward for it, and hopefully the tariffs, if not removed entirely, they get to be reduced so that we remain competitive within our southern market, and of course the players that are within that market.
I want to go back to the products in just a moment, but let me stay with something you just said, right? Because it came up in the briefing this morning where the minister speaks, in fact, both of them are speaking about the diversification of these markets. And again, Minister Pakstow saying that this is not Plan B, for example, that the African Continental Free Trade Area is already opening some doors. But listening to what you're saying, this is not the magic wand that many might look at as if it is.
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, diversification is something that South Africa has been pushing forward for some time now. And this has been mainly because of the agro-processing master plans, that have been developed to further develop, a number of farmers that are getting into the farming sector. And of course, the production that is coming into those, produce, it gets to be sent elsewhere. So diversification has always been something that we have been pushing, but now it's even more of a pressing matter. But unfortunately, given the current situation that a lot of countries, over 100 countries are currently facing the same problem. So it is not going to be as easy as one would want to. But the reality is that we still need to push for it as well, based on the fact that we are seeing a lot of increase in our production across most of our exporting products that we tend to sell, to the world. And then as for the medium to long term, that's when now diversification is going to come through. Now, not necessarily to all the products that we are sending to the US, as much as there are products that we can try to send elsewhere, for instance, stone fruit and others. But for some products, it really remains important that we try to retain the US market because of the fact that some of those products, they are quite in demand in the US and the Americas generally. So therefore, we're not going to really say that we're going to just take them to maybe Africa, for instance, because some of those products, they don't really into the demand as much as it is the case in the US. And of course, the issue of counter-seasonality, because most of our products get to be ready for the market simultaneous to some of the other countries that we compete for that market. So now that's why the issue of reduction in tariffs becomes a critical one to this extent.
And I suppose then it goes back to the point that the minister was making earlier, that's the agriculture minister saying that South Africa's agricultural exports, for example, especially citrus, are counter-seasonal to US production and therefore not a threat, but also speaking about the fact that avocados could still even be able to at least kind of compete despite these tariffs?
Exactly. That's one important thing, because the issue about tariffs is not because it really, as much as it destroys, but it really puts a country like South Africa at a disadvantage to countries that really get to have their products like avocado, for instance. The likes of Kenya, they get to have the biggest producer of avocado in South Africa. In Africa, I mean, they get to have their avocados in the same space or the same period as that of South Africa. So therefore, when we are to target a market, where they are already exporting to, and perhaps some of them, they even have lesser tariffs to other markets. So therefore, if we are, we get to address the issues in the US, and eventually we get the access of that market, even for the avocado, something that has been up, coming for some time, that will be much better, because we are seeing also growth in production of avocados. And therefore, if we are to push those to the US again, that will also be an important one. And then the issue of citrus, that is even more important there, because remember, as much as citrus is a group of products, oranges, mandarins, and all that. So as much as when you look into this proportion compared to what the country exports, it remains important, the fact that that market is quite, a very, premium market, as Minister John was saying, in terms of the interest rates and everything. So they tend to, the currencies, it tends to be an issue. I mean, it tends to be a beneficiary in terms of us accessing the sort of, therefore, continuing accessing that market. It's not a matter of something that we'll just overlook for any reason, but it's something critical, because USA does provide some of those, qualities of a market that one will not really just overlook because of whatever reason that they are having dispute in, be it trade or otherwise.
So in light of all of that, then, I suppose it's important that this new revised offer is actually pushed through and we do get a favorable outcome. If we don't, what could be the devastating consequences?
That one is going to be a hard pill to swallow, because as I was saying earlier on, that the main, for instance, if I'm to take the citrus, the producers elsewhere in the world that get to produce citrus simultaneously with South Africa, they get to have their products ready for the periods that we are currently, like for instance now, we have citrus rate being packed in all across the regions in South Africa that are exporting that. But that now, if you have to look to other southern hemisphere markets or countries, the likes of Chile, Peru, Argentina, and also and others, those countries, they are really a direct competition to us, not necessarily because we're targeting them, but generally even to other markets. So therefore, if they have, for instance, like now, if you have to check all these countries that I just mentioned, the likes of Chile, Peru, and Argentina, they have tariffs that are lesser than us. So that means then they already have an edge for these products to get to the US market, and therefore we're losing that that competitive edge that we had, not because of the good quality products that we do produce, but because the tariffs are very different. If you are to compare 30 to 10%, then the countries that have 10%, the likes of Kenya, for instance, even for macadamia, which is another key product that we export throughout the year, Kenya is really pushing South Africa to that end. So therefore, the of at least a reduction, if not completely removal of the tariffs, it's something that we are really hoping that is going to come through, but as far as this current deal is concerned.
Thabile, let's see then what becomes the response thereof, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts as soon as we know which direction this is going to see, if at all it's good for the sector or not. But thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. I appreciate your insights. That was Thabile Nkunjana, the agricultural economist at the National Agricultural Marketing Council.